Alright, so my question of focus for this week, for chapter 9 of our course text, was explain the difference and provide examples of both primary and secondary values. So before I even dive deep into that question, I think it's first important that we go ahead and define exactly what are values. So I like the definition that our course text provides, and it states that just as health and disease occur naturally, and so do values. So human values, they occur naturally, and pretty much what they are, they're the source. Humans are the source of values. We create them ourselves, and these values that we create, in society, they can be both positive or they can be negative, and that positive and negative impact depends on the course of action that's taken based on that particular value. So I have a little definition. I'll transition a little bit, and I'll talk about primary values first. So primary values, they can be seen in every culture, every generation, and every society. And the thing about primary values is that they occur naturally, and an example of that would be, for primary values, every culture, every generation, every society, no matter where you look at in the world, no matter what part of history you look at, everyone desires, desires to be loved and desires respect. And what makes these, the traits, the concepts of a desire to be loved, desire and respect, what makes those primary values is that they produce a good effect, on society. So an example of that, and I thought about myself, as a high school teacher, of a primary value would be, I think about the culture that I like that I strive to foster, in my own high school classroom. So many of my students are at risk. So they have issues in the family, financial issues. Maybe they come from a single parent household. Maybe they come from an unstructured household, issues at home. So for many of them, they don't experience love on a daily basis. So it's important for me. It's important for myself as an educator to have the primary value of showing my students love, not only because it'll it'll get them to to accomplish their academic goals in the classroom, but also it allows me, and I think this is most important as an educator, to form a connection with my students. As a high school teacher, I truly believe that in order for my students to learn, we have to have a genuine connection. It can't be fake. So for them to feel that love for me will get them to accomplish their academic goals and also grow as a person. So we talked about primary values, and I want to touch a little bit on negative primary values. They can also be negative. We talked about positive, so let's talk about negative. So an example of that would be corrosion, and I'll stick with myself in the case of a high school teacher. Let's say I were to threaten to give students a low grade based on behavior. That's an example of a negative primary value. So even though the outcome could be desirable on my part, I can get students to behave. Ultimately, for students, it's like a lose-lose situation. So that's an example of a negative primary value. And moving on, we also have secondary values. So secondary values, just to define them very quickly, these vary because how we talked about, we have different generations, different cultures, different societies all over the world. Every person within those societies, generations, etc., has their own idea of what makes up a good life. So an example, we'll stick with educators. Think about ourselves as educators, educational leaders, and let's think about law enforcement officers. Let's think about students from foreign countries. I don't know, could be from somewhere in Asia. It could be from Russia. Germany. Okay, all over the world. Think about a child in India, a child in Mexico. All right next door to us. All these different people. We all have different hobbies. We all have different foods that we eat. We all have different religions that we practice. Etc. We also have these differences, and it's these differences that make up, our different secondary values. Okay, so even though our secondary values differ, and this is what I found interesting in the course text, the author states that primary values are subject to secondary values. So, for example, even though everyone in the world, we're talking about everyone from every different culture, generation, society, even though everyone, would value receiving love, that's something that we hold dear to us. We all desire to receive love. The difference in the secondary value of love is that the way love is expressed in each culture is different. So think about the way weddings and marriages are conducted in different cultures. Think about the courting and dating process, the way it's addressed in different cultures. Think about what is deemed as acceptable expressions of love in different cultures. It varies from culture to culture, and it's these differences that truly create a greater I guess you could say a great uniqueness throughout every culture, every society, all over the world. We have the primary values that connect us, but it's these secondary values that really, I believe, help to highlight um, not only the differences, but the beauty and the uniqueness of every culture all over the world.